Okay, now for our guest for this evening. Janet Sumner has been the executive director of the Wildlands League since 2003, one of Canada's pre-eminent conservation organizations, giving voice to Canada's nature to make sure at least half of the country is protected forever, for all our kids, for climate, and for the planet. In 2017, Janet was appointed co-chair of the National Advisory Panel with a mandate to provide recommendations on how to protect 17% of Canada's terrestrial lands and inland waters by 2020. And in 2019, Janet was appointed the Special Representative on Nature for Canada. Janet is an expert negotiator, strategist, and communicator with considerable policy reform experience. She also has a long history working with industries, including oil and gas engagement, mining companies, and forestry giants. Excuse me one moment while I just admit some more people. Janet creates a clear path to solutions through some of the most intractable environmental dilemmas today. Can we save the old growth? Can we bring back species? How does it all fit with climate change? Janet brings to life the environmental challenges facing our planet with examples and experiences from her travels across Canada. We're so happy you can join us. Welcome, Janet.
Thanks very much, Sequoia. I'm very, very, very pleased to be here and presenting for the Vaughan Public Library. What a huge opportunity. Thank you so much for the invitation. So I gather I'm supposed to share my screen now. I'll do that so that people can see. I'll just start by apologizing. I'm just finishing day, I think, 12 of COVID. So you can still hear a little bit of raspiness in my voice. So I apologize for that. But by and large, I'm feeling so much better and eager for tonight's presentation. If you do have questions, feel free to type them into the chat, and Sequoia will try to flag those for me, and we'll hopefully get to that. It's also hard because we can't see each other, so I'm not sure at some junctures if my information will be either something you already know or something that you want to know more about, or something that you're saying, okay, well, I'm not sure I'm getting that. So it'd be good if you give some feedback or ask questions so then I know whether or not to pause or to go a little bit deeper for you. Maybe I'll just start a little bit about myself. I've been 30 years as an environmentalist working on a variety of issues, from everything from waste management to toxics in the Great Lakes. And now I have this really incredible opportunity to be working at that intersection of the extinction crisis and the climate emergency. And Canada is really at the forefront of that because, as you'll see, we have so much opportunity to be influencing this. So let's just make sure. Oh, yes. And I did promise that I would tell the story about sleeping with polar bears. In fact, we've had 2 opportunities to sleep with polar bears. And this summer, again, we're going to be going up to the northern tip of Ontario and spending some time with polar bears and beluga whales, actually, this time. But I'll get to the polar bear story in a little bit. And maybe just for context, I'll talk a little bit about Canada. This is actually the North American continent broken down into all of its ecoregions, but you can see the provinces and the territories overlaid on that as well. So Canada is really significant because many people have heard about how much carbon is in the Amazon rainforest and the need to protect the Amazon because it's so important for climate change. What most people don't know is that Canada's boreal and our peatlands store twice as much carbon per hectare than is in the Amazon. And that's largely because it's in this very peaty, boggy soil, which can be up to 6 meters deep, whereas the Amazon is storing carbon largely in the above ground vegetation. So that's the difference. It's and in Canada's boreal, that actual peatland is like a slow decomposing cold stew of organic matter. So that's one of the reasons we have so much carbon there. We also have 24% of the planet's fresh water, and 40% of the birds across the continent migrate north to Canada's boreal. So we're essentially the breeding grounds for 40% of the birds throughout the continent. In fact, about 3 billion birds migrate north to Canada's boreal, and 5 billion of them, after they've spent some time nesting, travel back south. So you can see the exchange and what a great opportunity we have in Canada in terms of keeping the bird nursery very functional for the entire continent. We also have this other opportunity, which is large mammal movement, which is right along the Yellowstone to Yukon corridor. It serves as a backbone across the continent. And then over here from Algonquin to the Adirondacks and then back up to the Appalachians is another mammal movement corridor. And then we have these incredible grasslands in Canada, which is one of the most endangered ecosystems. So you can see that Canada is an amazing place to be, and for nature, it's quite incredible. It's also really amazing because what Canada has promised on the global stage, while there are 1 million species globally facing extinction, and there are several hundred in Canada that are in the same situation, Canada has gone out with the G7 countries and promised to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity by 2030. And so this is a pretty big commitment, and Canada's promised to deliver on this. Now they have to figure out how to do that. The good news is we have a bit of a plan. And it starts with looking at where we are losing species and why. You can't just say, well, let's look at all of Canada and treat it the same, because it's not true. In the north, where you see these purple areas, that is where I would say we have quite a good deal of species abundance and not as much industrial development or industrial footprint. And that means that we have an opportunity to kind of get out ahead of that and do protection of species before we see them being impacted by the industrial footprint. And then in the middle of Canada, where you see all this green, that's where we've already had quite a bit of industrial development, whether it's mining or forestry, but we're in competition there where nature's still trying to hang on and keep from losing ground. Much of this is boreal caribou habitat right across here, and it is competing with forestry and then oil and gas in here. Apologies. The pink, which is down near the south and is really where most Canadians live, or the vast majority of Canadians, that area is the heavily settled or agricultural areas. It's where we have our cities and near urban areas. It's where nature is really struggling to survive. And that is where we have the most of our endangered species. The good news is, as I indicated, is that at Wildlands League, we have a blueprint for how to solve this. It's not a one size fits all. And I'm going to start now in the south. So and I'm going to use Ontario as a template, because Ontario, for better or worse, has all three conditions. Sorry, let's go back to this. So you can see Ontario has this highly developed area, areas with industrial development, and then areas that are largely still very intact and thriving abundant species. So with Ontario as our template, we started to build a model for what this might look like to halt and reverse species loss across the country. So if we start in the south, where we in fact have our ecological hotspot, where extinction is at the most critical level with the least amount protected and the most pressure from industrial development, but also from our cities and towns and just human expansion. This is where we started with our blueprint. And for us, this started with where we live. And it's about building nature back and building it back with people and getting people out into nature. We started the Nature Connectivity Project approximately about 3 or 4 years ago, I believe, maybe even 5 now. And it started with a series of maps. And that was where we wanted to understand just how much intact landscape was left and how could you build back with nature. So what I found absolutely fascinating when we did this mapping exercise is you could see all of these lines or these grids. And what I came to understand is, not all of them, but many of them were the back 40 of farmers' fields. It's where there were still some forest left or remnants of forest. And we started to see, and we started to ask ourselves the question, where we have some existing protections like the green belt, and this is the Rouge National Urban Park. So I'd say in this project must just predated that, because it wasn't until 2017 that we actually got a finalized Rouge National Urban Park. We're looking to expand this park with the Pickering Airport lands and see them added to that. The concept here is that you establish new protected areas by taking the last sort of remnants of intact areas and then building connective tissue or green infrastructure that can connect these. So this area is the green belt, and it goes all the way over from Coots, which is down here in the south, all the way up to the escarpment. And in fact, we started to build a map and ask ourselves the question, could we expand from the Greenbelt up here to QE2, Queen Elizabeth II Park? And there's a number of land trusts and conservation areas that are interested in kind of building the puzzle pieces that would see that connective corridor reestablished. But also asked ourselves the question, could you build connectivity from Georgian Bay to QE2 and then up to Algonquin, and find a way to actually start to build these the connective tissue, and then even over here to the Kawartha Highlands, and then obviously down to the Greenbelt. This literally takes the initiative of hundreds of people to start putting sometimes private land as contributions, sometimes forestry lands that people say, well, you know, we could readjust where we're doing our forestry and try to establish more of a corridor here that would allow for mammal movement, etc. And as you can see, working for expansion of the Greenbelt or expansion of Rouge National Urban Park would help. And then in addition to that, we've got all these river ravines there are 21 river ravines that run through Toronto, and finding a way to make sure that those are, we regenerate those. Canada's promised to plant 2 billion trees, finding places so establishing a vision that is about laying out a pathway to an interconnected network for nature so that nature can move and coexist with humans, and we can actually get out there and experience nature. I'll give you an example a little bit further southwest. And I grew up in London, Ontario, so I was actually very excited to see this area here, which is along the Thames River, and it's the Chippewas of the Thames that have decided to work on a restoration path around the Thames River and bring back some of that area. So you could see building a corridor from London to potentially Chatham along the Thames River might be possible. There's quite a bit of connectivity down here near Long Point and across to St. Thomas. And in fact, we've been working on a project near Windsor, actually in Windsor, to establish a new national urban park there and see potentially that connectivity take us all the way down to Point Pelee. So this is the idea, is to build where you have areas that are relatively good for nature, to then start to build the puzzle pieces and add and add and add. And what we find is when we do that, is many other people start to come to the table and say, well, I've got this parcel of land, or there's this other place that I think would be a good contributor. London is a good example where they've already started to create environmental areas that they have set aside in their own municipality with their own legal frameworks to be able to protect. And now actually starting to think about this as a connectivity with the work that the Chippewas of the Thames are doing. And Carolini in Canada, another environmental group, are doing massive restoration projects with farmers and some private woodlands. And so you can see that just the potential to create almost like a rolling improvement along this landscape, where people start to bring each of their puzzle pieces to the table and encourage better outcomes for nature. It also means getting people out into nature. Every year for many years, we ran our Paddle the Rouge event, which brought young people out to learn how to paddle. It was a free event. We haven't done it the last couple of years because of COVID, But this concept was a way to reconnect people to nature so that they could experience it and know what it was like. It was a place of refuge for people during COVID, and it was rejuvenation and inspiring for people. And if you love a place, then you want to protect it. So that was the concept between that, teaching children and their parents how to have fun in nature and not be afraid of it. Some people are very afraid of nature. This is Rouge National Urban Park Beach, and these are some of the students out there learning how to paddle with us. It really is all about having fun and reconnecting to nature. So this is actually the map of the Ojibwe shores, and this was the map of parcels of land, kind of like the Rouge, but it was in Windsor, where we were trying to bring all of these parcels together in one National Urban Park protected area. And just this week, Minister Guilbeault, the federal minister, announced that this parcel here, which is Ojibwe shores, and this is one of the last remaining intact parcels along the river here, would be added to the new National Urban Park. So that we've just turned this from yellow to green, and it's going through the process to become part of the new National Urban Park. That's incredibly important because it is home to tallgrass prairie, and tallgrass prairie act as a sponge and really help ameliorate on climate change. So these are all important pieces, especially when you get into this landscape that is so heavily impacted, where you can actually start to bring nature back into these places. So now I'm going to talk about the middle and what our game plan is for that. Oh, sorry, let's not go too far. So the middle of Canada, as I said, is really a place that is in competition with the industrial footprint. This is logging in Northwest Ontario, where this is a logging road. When they go into the forest and they clear cut the forest, they bring the trees to the roadside and they cut off the limbs and will leave them staggered there. They'll take the tops and the limbs and delimb those trees and leave the slash at the side of the road. They're called landings. This is where all the landing areas, and then they'll load the logs on the trucks and take them out. But these scars that we, oh, sorry, got that in the wrong order. These scars that land on the side of the road, you can see them a little bit better here, remain there for decades. And some of them are very tall, they're like 10 feet tall, and they smother the landscape. You can see this, we did a 2-year field study here. And the reason we do this work is to better understand what really is going on in our forests, and then we can come up with solutions. So again, this is just an example. This is, you could see the forest is actually starting to grow back here, but doesn't grow back here. And we really wanted to understand what that meant. This around here, on this area, you can see the forest is renewing, but in this area, where it has been smothered, it is not renewing. And so why is that, and how can we either do forestry differently or take into account that these areas, while you have the forest regenerates here, it doesn't come back here. And we found that approximately 14% of that forest is lost does not come back over a 20 to 30 year period, which is a significant piece because with climate change, we need to be regenerating all of our forests when we log them, and we can't go past the 2050, or that is a carbon loss to the environment. Maybe I'll just pause there and see if there are any questions. It also gives me a chance to have a drink of water. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop those into the chat, or I'm very happy to answer questions. As you can see, I'm quite passionate about the issues that we work on. So happy to answer any questions.
If anyone wants to turn on their microphone, you can do that, or you can put questions in the chat and I will read them out.
Okay, I'll just keep going. This is another example of where you see forestry. This is after 30 years, and these areas here might be berry bushes, but they won't be forests, and there'll be a road that is in there as well. This is another example of how you can see that. And we had to build this through research. Like Trevor went out into the field and spent 2 summers going out into into these forests to, somebody's asking to help reforest the land. One of the challenges is with the logging footprint that occurs is it actually smothers the land. So if you could, you would have to go in and remove the debris that is left there, and then grade the forest floor and then replant it. We've looked at that and wondered if it could happen, but our understanding is that it might cause more damage to go back in to try to reforest those areas. And instead, what we've suggested is that we need to prevent that damage rather than try to repair it after the fact.
Janet, there are a couple of questions.
Sure, go ahead.
One person's asking, how can we help to reforest the land? And somebody else has asked, are there no laws to force the logging companies to deal with the landing sites?
Well, it's very interesting. I think I answered the reforest question, but the question around preventing companies from creating this damage, what's interesting is when we did this work, with all our work, we try to be very well researched. And so we approached two forest auditors whose job it is to audit forestry operations. And they both said to us, well, what we're required to do is to audit the forest at a 10-year mark past the logging. And when we do that, we can see that a lot of the forest is coming back. And the assumption was that these areas that were landings or were roads would also come back. And it was only when we did this study that looked into it in more in depth and we uncovered it that people started to say, oh dear, our assumption that it was going to come back doesn't prove true, or it hasn't proven true in that we did 260 sites. So it wasn't just a random sample, but it was quite a good number of those. And you can see them at loggingscars.ca. So when we did that, we got quite concerned and we took this information to the federal government. And in fact, we looked across Canada using Google Maps to see if we could see that kind of signature footprint again. And to be honest, hand on heart, when we met with forestry companies, they didn't know that this damage was occurring. In fact, many of the forestry companies said to us, it's not possible. We reforest and we do the best that we can, and it's true. A good number of what you see out there is coming back, but this 14% is not. And so I think it is one of those situations where, for the best of intentions, people are assuming that what they're doing is actually going to work. It's called a free to grow. You basically replant the trees and then they're free to grow. And the assumption is that those areas will regenerate over time. And we just weren't seeing it. In fact, we kept flying over the forest and seeing these areas that were barren and said, we need to understand it. Now you can see from this slide that it actually is suggesting that that's a significant carbon loss as well. And so that's one of the other reasons, again, that Canada's at this nexus point of both on species and on carbon, because these areas are very carbon rich. Hopefully that answers your question. But then we started to ask the other question, well, okay, so this is what happens when you open up a new intact area. And we've been working on a project. This is a forest management unit in Northeast Ontario. And this is all open for logging. In fact, this area, you're allowed to go and build and do logging. The forestry company is encouraged to do that. But the First Nation wanted to see this area protected. So we decided that what we would do is look at how much if you didn't go in there and log, if you didn't lose that 14%, what would that mean in terms of a carbon saving? And could you use that as a way to maybe even generate money for the First Nations or even the logging company by not harvesting there? And so we're just at the very beginning of this project, but we're starting to look into essentially an avoided deforestation by not logging this area. I could see there's another question as well. And then, so from our perspective, we're just starting down this path with Moose Cree and a couple of other First Nations to try and answer these questions. And when we looked at this, it meant we needed to get the accounting right. So how much carbon is there? And we're pushing Canada to take another look at how it does its accounting so that we can actually get a benefit for communities that maybe want to avoid logging. So this is the North French watershed. We're partnering with Moose Cree to protect that North French, but also see a carbon benefit. As you can imagine, it doesn't really work very well if we only go in and say, don't do logging, but rather finding another way to create a monetary benefit, potentially a carbon benefit that could be sold and be the resources then redirected to the local communities. So this is just to give you a sense of where so we're down here in Toronto, and this is the North French watershed, and it's the lower half of it approximately that is open to logging. The northern part of it is not licensed for logging, but this is also gives you a soil density map, and you can see that this incredible red and orange is carbon density. And I believe there's over 500 million tons of carbon in this North French watershed. So 500 million tons of carbon. And it's because, again, of the depth of the carbon. So now here comes the polar bear story. And this is the area where we've ended up sleeping with polar bears twice now. So, and this summer we'll make our third adventure into polar bear country. So it starts with planes, trains, and automobiles. You can't get up there just taking a commercial flight. In fact, that's a very difficult thing to do. So it's usually a flight to Timmins, and then a drive to Hearst, and then from there we charter a plane and get up to Peawanuck. And we fly over some amazing areas. This is some of the peat bogs. What I really love about them is they're just so beautiful, like they're jewel tones and the richness, and it's just I just find it amazing. And it's an incredibly flat landscape. It's 50% water, as you can see. And then this is also where you've got some treed bog. But this is when we flew up to, and we actually ended up paddling on the Winnisk River, or on the Sutton River. I'll see if this works. It'll just give you a sense of this. And I'm not sure if you can hear the sound because it's quite loud. I hope you can't. But this gives you, these are the string bogs because they look like a whole bunch of strings strung together. And they're just an incredibly rich carbon area on the planet. In fact, there are about 5 large carbon pools left on the planet. One is Canada's boreal, the Amazon, and then Southeast Asia, the Congo, and Russia's boreal.
Jana, is the carbon coming from the trees? Is that
no? Well, it basically what happens is over centuries, the vegetation here, when it dies, it essentially because it's a great big, as you can see, it's a lot of water. It basically falls and it decomposes. It has a short, it's very much frozen landscape up here. So it's decomposing over time in anaerobic and aerobic situations, but it compresses it and builds on top of each other, and then just over time just compresses and compresses and compresses, and you get anywhere from a meter to 6 meters deep of this essentially like decomposing stew of organic matter. And it's just vegetation that's been dying off over centuries.
So not trees, or maybe trees were there in an earlier time.
It can be trees, but it can also just be the vegetation in a bog, like grasses and vegetation material that would be there. So it's everything from, because when you're up here, it gets into a very, it can be a tree bog, it can be full-on trees, but then some of the trees are only 4 feet tall, right? Like it's not, it looks really amazing, but when you're standing next to them, they're quite small. So then we landed at this area that is the Sutton Ridges, and from there we paddled along the Sutton River, and for about 5 or 6 days, it was a really amazing paddle. And along that Sutton River, this is Dave who works for me, and he's lying in a polar bear den where we probably just missed seeing a pregnant polar bear who was getting in from the shore and trying to rest and relax right along the shores. But that indentation is very likely a polar bear. And this is Sam, our Indigenous guide, Sam Hunter from Pewanak. This is Sam making what he calls cowboy coffee. So the grounds are at the very bottom of the percolator. He's lost the percolating piece in his various camping trips, and now he swings it. I think the magic number is 25 times to basically push the grounds to the bottom, and that's how he makes cowboy coffee for us in the mornings. And we were really fortunate to, when we hit the coast, this is right on the coast of Hudson Bay, it was a pretty dense fog, actually. And we were maybe about 6 or 8 of us, and we were, the tide was out. So this is the landscape when the tide is out. The bottom of the ocean is very rocky, as you can see, and some of those rocks are really quite large. And we just, as a small group, sat there to try and get our bearings, and we were waiting for the fog to lift. And at the first instant, we saw one caribou kind of rolling on past us and stopped and looked at us, and wasn't scared and didn't run away, just kind of moseyed along, almost like, I guess you would see like a cow even, and just kind of moseyed along as they were going. And then the fog started to lift, and as the fog lifted, we realized we were actually in the midst of about 200 caribou. So in the middle of a caribou herd on the coast of Hudson Bay. And that was a pretty good encounter, just even that itself. But Sam was taking us on a bigger journey, and I don't have as many photographs of this, but as we were wending our way along the coast, we came across these footprints that, were the size of a dinner plate, were enormous. And he said, oh, well, that's a juvenile polar bear. And so we decided to follow the tracks, and we did. And we got to this small copse of trees. And when I describe these trees, as I said, these trees are about 4 feet to 5 feet tall. So they're not taller than the entirety of our crew. And on the ridge, just maybe a football field away from us, sat a polar bear sleeping, just having an afternoon nap, I think, in the heat of the summer's day. And Sam said to us, okay, well, we're going to go single file and see how close we can get to get some images. So we started walking towards the polar bear again in this single file. And I was trying to figure out why we went in the single file. And Sam said, well, we're going in a single file so that when he looks up, if he sees us, he won't see it'll be harder for him to see, because he'll just be seeing one pinpoint on the landscape, as opposed to if we're spread out, then it's much easier for him to see. Anyway, we got a little bit further, maybe 20 feet or so, not very far from the trees, at which point the polar bear stood up. And I'd been to the zoo before. I'd seen polar bears in the zoo, and you know how they go back and forth. And I thought, oh, well, that's because they're in a contained space. Well, this polar bear started going back and forth and lifting its head and lifting its head. And Sam said, okay, it's time to leave. And I was like, why is it time to leave, Sam? He says, because he's now tracking us. He was getting a scent of the land and then going from side to side, basically triangulating where that scent was coming. And so Sam made us go back the way we had come, but took a circuitous route around where we had stopped for lunch. And he said to me, well, we're doing this, we're going past the lunch spot as opposed to going directly to the boats. Because as we go past the lunch spot, if he's following us, he'll stop at the lunch spot because we had lunch there and there will be all these food smells. And essentially we'll lose him at the lunch spot while we're heading to the boats, which to Sam's credit worked just a treat. So that was our first encounter with a polar bear. We did not have to sleep with one that. The other thing that I found amazing about being up there is the flowers are incredibly beautiful. It's such a sparse landscape, but when you're there and if the flowers are in bloom, they're just like heather. They're just on fire, as you can see from this image. This is our campsite. So you can imagine if you stumble across a polar bear or you're in polar bear country, you're not able to hide from, behind trees, etc. And what Sam had us doing was erecting these, like it's almost counter to what you would do in a bear situation in the south, because we actually would set up all our food bins and materials. We would almost set them up in a tower, maybe 10 or 15 feet from our, maybe 25 feet actually, further than that, away from our campsite. So they would work as an attractant for a polar bear who might come and as soon as they rattle those, you kind of get an early warning system that they're in your campsite, and then you can take action. And we carry deterrents like bangers and large gauge shotguns to kind of push the polar bears along to other places and kind of deter them from interfering with us. But that's very, very different strategies for managing polar bear encounters. The next time that we ran into polar bears was a different trip, and we actually went along the coast. We went up the Winnis River, again with Sam and his guiding team, and we took motorized canoes to the coast and then traveled. So that was a 3.5-hour trip from Pewanik up to the coast, and then 3.5 hours across the top of Hudson Bay or the top of Ontario to Cormorant Point, which is a traditional hunting and fishing area. And this is going along the river. You can see us. This is one of the motorized canoes here. That's actually Sam, and I'm in a boat with a guide and 2 other people as well. And you can see the landscape on the side. These are trees, but they're really quite small. A lot of this is all peat bog under here. And what's very disturbing, or what was very disturbing to me, is these trees were all falling over. And when I asked about it, it's because the permafrost is melting, and these bogs are collapsing in on themselves. And so we're seeing the melting, or the unfreezing of this, what was permafrost. And as it does that, the rivers themselves widen and it gets shallower, and it becomes less navigable for the indigenous nations to go out hunting and trapping on these waterways. But it also indicates that climate change is very real up here and is starting to take its toll on this landscape. There's another image of this a little bit closer. And for me, this really hit me in my heart. Like, I had worked on climate change for many years, and to really see the evidence of this, where you could see the collapse happening along this watercourse of these areas that up until recently were permanently frozen. So anyway, when we got out to the coast and we were going along our way, we ran into this guy. This is one of the polar bears that we got to sleep with. In fact, as we were approaching the shore, he decided to come out. And one of the things that I found out about polar bears is they're very, very clever. And they're also the top of the food chain, which is something that you had to remember when you were out there. I don't spend a lot of my life not being the top of the food chain, so it was very interesting to be out there with a species that was indeed the top of the food chain. And what I mean by that, but being clever, is one of the ways that they hunt is they go up to ice shelves and they reach up and they grab a seal, and they'll have a seal snack. And we're actually smaller than seals, and these guys, this guy here got within, I'd say, 15 feet of our boat, and we were in, again, motorized canoes. So the First Nations guides just kept us out of range of these guys, but he was pretending like he was swimming as if the water was so deep that he was swimming, until he got up in his haunches and he looked us dead in the eye and he started grinding his teeth, and you could see that he was firmly standing and could, launch himself. And one of the facts I kept remembering in my head is they're as fast as the cheetah over 40 meters. And so I was, thank goodness he's in the water. But we were safe from this guy and managed to navigate our way clear of that. But that's who greeted us when we got to our campsite. That's another shot of him just out of our range. Oh, yeah, there he is, swimming away. But you can see he was just coming. We were actually going to be camping up in here, so he was just coming out to greet us, if you will. But the story about sleeping with polar bears is, obviously, when we arrived at the campsite and we met this guy, we became abundantly aware that this was a place where polar bears were frequented quite a bit. And one of the things that we had was that at least 2 people at a time would be on the lookout and be aware and looking around for polar bears. So the rest of the camp was being set up, and Dave and I had first lookout. And we had binoculars, and we had some camp chairs, and we were sitting there watching for polar bears. And what I found, you can see these great big rocks here, and again, they sit on the bottom of the ocean floor, and when the tide's out, they're quite prominent on the landscape. And some of them are really enormous. They're boulders, and they have all different kinds of colors. And we could see these boulders through our binoculars, and I was watching, and I thought to myself, I think one of the boulders just moved. And I said, Dave, could you take a look out there? And sure enough, there was this big sort of milky white boulder with a couple of eyes, and he was sort of like hiding his nose like this, and then looked up and then looked down, and I was fascinated. And then I saw him almost like a cartoon, like kind of walk over to the next boulder and hunker down again. At which point I said to Sam, I said, hey, we've got, polar bear. And he goes, well, don't worry about it. He's at least 1 kilometer away. And I said, well, shouldn't we be setting off some of the bear bangers, or, creating a bit of diversion? And he goes, no, we have to wait till he gets much closer. I was like, what? He says, yeah, he has to be close enough to camp so that when we set off a noise deterrent, it actually works as a proximity thing, that, you were close to this camp, and then the noise banger went off, and that's why I'm not going to go back to this area. So Dave and I sat watching very, 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 very diligently as the polar bear kind of walked back and forth. But then the wind changed, and he decided we were no longer of any interest, and there was an interest out to sea, so he left us. But we slept on this Cormorant Point, where the polar bears had been 4 nights in a row, highly conscious of the fact that we were sleeping in polar bear country. So that was a couple of the times that I've had the enormous benefit of my job of being able to go out and actually see the landscape and just what's out there. This is just a reminder of where we were, which is up here at the very tip of Ontario. And this is the dense, rich carbon that we have in Ontario. It's also pretty dense over here, but all along this boreal landscape is just billions of tons of carbon. And so it's very important for climate change, but also for species, that we do the right activities here. Here's another example of this. This is Canada's peatlands. You can see this is the Amazon, the Congo, Southeast Asia, and up into but Canada's got some of the most dense, rich peatlands left on the planet. Now, the good news is we're working in this area with Mushkegowuk. This highlighted area is the Mushkegowuk people. There are, I believe, 7 different communities, all the way from TTN up to Attawapiskat, and they have called this place home for time immemorial, and they're very interested in seeing these areas protected. The North French is the area that the Moose Cree want to see protected. That's this area in here. But many of these other communities want to see areas protected for, they call them the breathing and the birthing lands. The elders do, because they just understand how important they are, not just for wildlife, but for the planet. And so we're working with many of the communities along here to realize the protection. This area, it's on this map, but I highlighted it here because it is, some of you may have heard of the Ring of Fire. It's a large mining find that is in, as you can see, is in some of the dense, rich boreal peatlands that the province of Ontario right now is saying that they would like to see developed, and mining companies would like to have access to. Right now, all they've done is, not all, but they've been doing mineral exploration, which has already started to cause some damage. This is another project we're working on here with Kitchener-May-Kuzamininiwig, or KI, and they're looking to see their homelands protected as well, along with the North French here. So this is the Ring of Fire area. And just to situate this, it's in the middle of 5 of the last great rivers in North America that are undammed and still free flowing. So this is just and this is what mining in the Ring of Fire looks like. Because it is a very boggy system, and they have to do drilling almost into water and then build platforms. And they've even lost some pretty big heavy machinery into these boreal bog systems. Yeah, here's, I include this picture because it always makes me kind of laugh a little bit. People will ask the question, why is this area called the Ring of Fire? Well, as you saw, it was sort of like a crescent, but it was called the Ring of Fire by one of the original company owners who founded this place, or found the mineral deposits. And he was a big Johnny Cash fan. And you can see that because the rig here is called Big Sue. I had dinner with him one night and just asked him, and he said, oh, well, yeah, I'm a big Johnny Cash fan, so that's why it's called the Ring of Fire. For no other reason than that. But they also named their equipment after some of the Johnny Cash songs. So this is another example of where they have to basically clear cut an area. You can see it's very wet, but then they lay down all of this dirt to sort of smother and absorb the moisture, which in and of itself causes climate damage. And this is what it looks like. This isn't even today. It's actually grown by another 30%. These are places where they will have drilled and then dragged the drill and done that, because they're building a grid pattern to understand what the underground find is. This just more images of that. And this is not counted for in Canada's carbon accounting because it's seen as a light footprint. But my understanding from the scientists I've spoken to is it's going to take approximately, if logging scars take a long time to heal, this is going to take several hundred years to heal, because this damage to boreal peatlands and to the bog system will just literally take centuries to come back. So this is, again, this is the Ring of Fire. This is where all of this yellow is mining claims. And so they actually put claims all along this esker to basically predetermine where a possible road would go. They haven't got a road there yet, but this is where the mining claims are. And then this is the Ring of Fire. And in the Ring of Fire, there is some nickel, there's chromium, some gold, diamonds, those kinds of things. And there's no access road to it right now. But the math being done by Wildlife Conservation Society, they're a group of 40 PhD scientists, and they looked at the carbon numbers here, and they have a carbon specialist who has said somewhere between 130 to 250 megatons of carbon are at risk if they do mining here. And that actually is the megatons of carbon. You'd have to multiply that by 3.67 to get the CO2 equivalent. So you would be looking at almost a billion tons of CO2 equivalent damage that could occur from developing the Ring of Fire, or that would be at risk. And my question for Canada has always been, well, if we're out there trying to get to a net zero situation globally, how do we accomplish that if we actually put into play another billion tons of CO2? So this is one of the big questions that I have about the Ring of Fire. In addition to that, we've got the caribou ranges that are up here, plus all of these contaminants which would be mobilized and move up the food chain if the disturbance was to occur. So this is part of the work that we do to bring to light some of these questions. Here's this polar bear guy who came for a visit to our camp again. But this, I'm going to end on a really good news story, which is, as I mentioned, we've been working with Mushkegowuk. And Mushkegowuk, this is Lawrence, who sits on the Marine team for Mushkegowuk Council. And they're very interested in doing a marine conservation area just off the coast of the Mushkegowuk territories, or right across the coast of Ontario. This woman is Zuzu, and she works for the University of Manitoba. She's a marine biologist. And we were traveling with her last summer. That's me in the red baseball cap, and Anna, who works for me. She's our director of conservation. I forget this guy's name. He was our driver. He was really a lot of fun. This is the marine conservation area that Mushkegowuk want to do, which is again right off the coast of. So it would include maybe 20 to 30 kilometers inland, because, as you can imagine, it's tidal, so it doesn't, not just one line. So it's like, how briny can you go in to capture it as part of a national marine conservation area? They've now signed an agreement with the federal government to move this forward. It will take several years to get all of the science aligned and understand what's at play. You can see some of the various ingredients that are going into this. And our job is to work with the Indigenous nations. And you can see these are all the Mushkegowuk First Nations. And then in addition to that, there's the Pewanik and Fort Severn, who are not technically part of Mushkegowuk, but are still part of the National Marine Conservation Area. And again, that was the place where we got to go see polar bears or sleep with them. So we hope that this will turn into a new National Marine Conservation Area. What's also interesting is that the Quebec Cree are interested in having a marine conservation area on this side. And then there are some interests for a marine conservation area that would span the Manitoba coast. So you could see everything from southwest Hudson Bay, all of James Bay, and a little bit of the eastern portion of Hudson Bay being turned into a national marine conservation area, where conservation would be the primary driver of activity there. And there will be two scientific studies or research vessels that are visiting this area. The Zuzu and her team went up last summer, and they'll be going again this summer. And we should see some science coming out of this area, which will really start to speak to how much carbon is in this in the sediments, because of course you've got all of these rivers that are going through Ontario's incredibly rich boreal bog system. And one of my big questions is, how much carbon is it carrying out to sea and then depositing along this sea floor, and how much is actually growing in the marine grasses and in the marine biomass? What's actually being stored in terms of a carbon value here, and just how important is this in terms of a carbon regulator for the planet? So that would be. So this is the handout that you can have sent to you. It's our marine, we call it a broadsheet. and you can see it's from the breathing lands to the birthing place. The birthing place being where so many of the birds are migrating and coming back and repopulating the rest of the continent, but the breathing lands in the sense that this is boreal bog system. You can see, I think Sequoia asked a question about the trees. You can see trees along here, but then huge swaths of it are just sort of low-level vegetation and not trees at all. So we have this interlocking crisis of biodiversity loss and climate change. Globally, we've lost 2/3 of the world's populations in the last 50 years. We're not immune in Canada, and we have over 500 plant and animal species. 200 of those are at risk in southern Canada and in southern Ontario. And in Ontario, our caribou ranges are in peril. This isn't just to say that, animals are in trouble, but these ecosystems are in trouble. And what that means is it actually means these are the systems that support life, including our life. So if we're not taking care of these boreal bog systems, which seem, so far, they're further away than Florida is to us. So, but if we aren't taking care of that, all the climate models are built on an assumption that boreal bog system will keep absorbing carbon at the same rate or greater. And if we do damage to it, if we build great big mining complexes into it and we deplete the capacity of that landscape to absorb carbon, then we do so at our own peril. And this is why we need to be paying attention to not just how the animals are doing and how biodiversity is doing, but in terms of how all ecosystems are faring and their ability to support the functions of life, because we depend on those functions. So again, our game plan is that instead of doing damage, it's time to start protecting, connecting, and restoring these areas. And all the help that we get to support us helps us get out there to learn more. This is Trevor with Sam on the coast at one of our many trips. And as I said, we're going back again this summer. We'll be up there getting images for our work on beluga, protection of beluga, and hopefully getting some more great polar bear shots and stories to tell about polar bears. Sleeping with polar bears is one of my best. This is the idea that we can secure a future for our climate, but also a livable world. Yeah, maybe I'll just finish there.
Okay, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Janet. So amazing to see such fantastic imagery, fantastic stories, and from somebody who has so much experience in that area and with all the people that live there. We really appreciate all of your insight and for your sharing your time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite. Do we have a question?
People are saying thank you, and something here, let's see. Amazing to learn about the wildlife that we have in Canada and the work that you do to preserve it.
Thank you.
And I will send out the handout that Janet mentioned. I'll be doing that early next week. And just a reminder that the recording will be up at some point in 4 to 6 weeks on our YouTube channel, so you can check back there to view it again. So good night, everybody. Good night, Janet. Thank you again. Loved your presentation.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.